I have received a petition with 9,776 signatures on the subject of low traffic neighborhoods. As this issue is being debated tonight and has been mentioned in the motion for debate, I have allowed the petitioner to address Council to present her petition. I have allowed her 5 minutes to speak on her petition. Laura Driscoll will now present the petition to Council before we begin the debate on this motion.
Thank you, Mayor, for allowing me the right to bring this to the meeting tonight. If you're okay, I'll start now.
Please do.
Okay. I composed and circulated this petition in July. On learning of this scheme, immediately I was struck by the level of pollution and congestion the ill-thought-out design of these LTNs would create, by forcing all traffic onto a few main roads. On further investigation, the inequality in terms of impact that these LTNs would cause also became starkly apparent. The huge numbers of local residents who subsequently concurred with this view and felt the same as I did is a testament to these concerns and the strength of feeling about it. We are now demanding a democratic and inclusive process be instigated regarding the measures with both proper preemptive consultation on design and placement, transparency and resident-wide engagement throughout the whole process. This means sharing the simple problem statement of what the Council are trying to achieve here and why and how particular LTNs were chosen, baseline data, success criteria, what does good look like, for example. All of these issues have extensively been asked of the Council by thousands of residents and one local MP, along with numerous councillors, and yet we still do not have any answers, only woolly promises of undefined consultation. This is not good enough when the Council are seeking such wide-ranging and impactful change to residents' daily lives and well-being. Since our initial questions, we have discovered that many aspects of the LTN orders, process design and implementation have not seen the Council fulfil its legal obligations. Consultation and impact assessment on various groups and services have been missed. The most telling of these is the lack of consultation with the London Ambulance Services. This is simply not right and extremely dangerous and abdicates the fundamental first priority of the Council to keep residents safe. The political leadership of this Council has been blinded by their rush to gain funds and implement schemes that fit with its philosophical and party political goals. Have we not learned anything from the awful tragedy of Grenfell regarding expediting works without proper thought? Access to emergency services is now and always will be a priority for everyone. Simply put, access for all. Or do the Council believe some people are more equal than others? This brings me to the question as to the timing of such a trial. We are entering a second wave of COVID. People are already stressed, worried about health, job losses, balancing children being out of school with work, and now LTNs. This combined with the fact that conducting a trial, giving you data from an extraordinary time as a basis for steady long-term planning, is at best a questionable strategy. Other councils, Redbridge being the latest, have listened. They have cited lack of equality statements and consultation with emergency services as reasons for abandoning these trials. I ask LTN Council, who have the same lack of consultation with emergency services, to do the very same. Nobody wants to be responsible for someone dying because an emergency service could not reach them in time. We are aware that the pro-LTN lobby, and unfortunately some of the councillors here today, like to paint us as a noisy minority that do not reflect the silent majority. Nothing could be further from the truth. This is not about NIMBYism or anti-progress. The issues we have described are impacting real people's lives. Opposition is growing and not slowing. Daily I receive dozens of emails and messages from many people representing a broad range of people cutting across all elements of social and political spectrum. We have already been forced to march in our thousands, create and sign a petition with now 10,000 signatories, write thousands of emails to various councillors, MPs, government departments and emergency services to raise the fundamental shortcomings of these schemes and demonstrate the local residents are not in favour. It is sad that our council are not fulfilling their responsibilities and doing this themselves. But make no mistake, if the council won't protect local people, we will. The leader of the council would like you to believe the non-consultation of LAS was an isolated mistake, and that is now fixed, and that the council is listening and consulting.
30 seconds.
Nothing could be further from the truth, and only today we had to file a fifth judicial review because they are not bothering to respond to official letter. I ask one final thing of each and every one of you. Put aside your political allegiances, forget the party whip, think about the elderly, the disabled, those protected characteristics of all those that should have been taken into account and consulted before their lives were turned upside down, and do the right thing tonight. Vote these LTNs out and reset a proper consultation. Work with the people of Ealing and not against us.
Thank you for presenting your petition to Council. The debate and the vote on this petition will form the response to this petition. I now call on Councillor Stafford to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I rise figuratively to propose the motion which stands in my name. And of course, it's almost impossible to follow the eloquence of Lorna there, but I will attempt to do so. We all in this borough want less pollution and congestion, but these ideologically driven and poorly conceived LTNs have failed to do this, and in some areas made them worse. As has been described, 10,000 people have signed a petition against this. 3,000 people marched on the town hall to object. We as local Conservatives have done a survey online and posted through people's doors. We've received over 1,000 responses in 10 days, 93% of which are against the LTNs. This, Mr. Mayor, is the biggest issue I've seen since Labour's previously ill thought out plan for a tram down the Uxbridge Road. But before I talk about the LTN specifically, I think there are some myths that I need to bust around this. Firstly, the myth is that the government imposed these. Simply not true. Our neighbouring Hillingdon, for example, has no LTNs or anything that looks like one. The second myth is that consultation wasn't allowed or there wasn't enough time for proper consultation. The letter from the Secretary of State clearly states that he expected consultation. And our own survey, which has garnered such good response in 10 days, proves that the council could have done a proper consultation. The third myth is that we can't do any consultation or any changes until after 6 months have elapsed. Wandsworth, Lewisham and Redbridge have all removed their LTNs, so this can happen now. And finally, and perhaps the worst myth of all, is about the type of people who are objecting to LTNs. Councillor Conlon, in a quote in a tweet, described us as entitled public school types. That's not who's been contacting me. It's teachers, it's nurses, it's disabled people, it's cyclists and walkers, it's young families who are trying to get their children to school or to after-school clubs. And the problems with these LTNs were obvious from the start, as Lorna has described. Gridlock on our main roads, including for buses. Increased pollution in those areas. Horn Lane, one of the most polluted parts of our borough, is now more polluted because cars are being forced onto it. And we've seen extra pollution outside our primary schools, like St Mark's or Little Ealing and the Mount Carmel. But there were less obvious problems that have appeared as well. I mean, who would have thought that the emergency services wouldn't have been able to get through? But we've seen that fire brigade drill, struggling to get that post out of the ground. And as has been described, the fact that there was no consultation with the London Ambulance Service, which meant that lives could have been put at risk by this council, is an absolute disgrace. But there are also issues with parking. People not being able to park in their roads anymore because everyone's having to park on one side of the barrier. And women who've emailed me who say they're now fearful for their safety at night because the roads are so empty. Like all of Ealing Labour's anti-car policies, these hit the poorest and the most vulnerable and those most struggling with COVID. Those who need to drive to work, those who live on main roads, those local small business owners, those tradesmen who need to travel between areas to do their work, and those young families who need to take their children to school or to after-school clubs. But the council says, don't worry, we're going to consult. But a proper consultation needs to be based on evidence. There's very little data on traffic flow and pollution before the introduction of these LTNs. And those that there are seems to suggest that in those areas, pollution and congestion weren't a significant problem. And second of all, and perhaps most importantly, a consultation needs to be unbiased and to be seen to be unbiased. And this is where residents have significant concerns. The leader has already said in that notorious video that he wants to take advantage of COVID and to make the LTNs permanent. He refused to acknowledge the 10,000 signatories on the change.org petition,
Mr.
but
Mayor.
then promoted the pro-LTN change. Mr. Mayor, I think he has to wait till after I finish before he interrupts me. He promoted the pro-LTN change.org petition.
30 seconds.
He and his councillors refused to respond to residents and refused to stand up for those residents in places like Fisher's Lane and Turnham Green Terrace, which have been imposed by Hounslow, but then will bend over backwards for his mates in Hounslow when they demand a meeting about Swinken Avenue. And of course, the online consultation platform is one where the head of sales and marketing is Labour councillor Peter Mason. How and why would any residents have confidence that this consultation will be fair? Mr. Mayor, in conclusion, we don't need to wait 6 months. We already know that most have been an abject failure. It's time to rip them up and do a proper consultation. This is about consulting with residents and listening to them. Whatever your views on LTNs, as elected representatives, we must ensure that we consult properly and we act swiftly to correct our mistakes. This council has failed to do either. Now this council needs to get a grip and do so by voting in favour of this motion.
Councillor Milliken.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Many thanks for granting this extraordinary council meeting to allow to debate the so-called low transport neighbourhood schemes. And thank you to Lorna O'Driscoll for presenting her petition so strongly. I'm a cyclist myself, and I'm first to want us to cycle and walk more around our neighbourhoods. And indeed, I live in one of the LTNs myself, and so I know what local feeling is. But the issue I have, and the issue thousands of Ealing and Acton residents have, is that we are not consulted first. In today's day and age, we expect to be consulted before our lives are made much more difficult. You did not ask local residents who are supposed to benefit from these schemes whether they actually wanted them. You didn't even consult the London Ambulance Service, so much so that I've received numerous reports from local residents who dialed 999 and then the ambulance was delayed as it tried to navigate its way through the maze of roadblocks. You'll have seen the video only this week of the fire engine trying to navigate through the roadblock in Ensley Road. It was like watching a Rowan Atkinson farce if it wasn't so serious. Fortunately, it was only a drill, but I dread to think what would have happened if there had been a real fire. But because there was no consultation, we've ended up with all sorts of problems that are making residents' lives a misery. Local residents now have to drive miles around to get on their way and do their day-to-day business. These could all have been foreseen if there had been a proper consultation. The local GP surgeries up in arms as their doctors and nurses were not given exemption to drive through the roadblocks and now have to drive round and round to make their calls. We're all ordering much more online, and so all the DPD drivers, the Parcel Force drivers, the Tesco.com drivers delivering our goods all have to drive much further. The local window cleaner, the milkman, the local landscape gardener, the local painter and decorator, the Uber driver, all have to drive extra miles. Local mums and dads taking their kids to after-school football or swimming or driving to the supermarket now have to drive an extra time as they get caught in more congestion. All this diverted traffic has created such an issue on Swinken Avenue, which is a Hounslow road, that Hounslow councillors are complaining that Ealing is dumping its diverted traffic and pollution onto their residents. Along with my ward colleagues, I joined Councillor Bell and Councillor Saviours when we were effectively summoned to 2 meetings with the Hounslow leader to try and sort this out. They want to close Swinken Avenue to non-residents. I hereby give notice, Mr. Mayor, that if they do close this road, then Councillor Bell and Councillor Saviours, I'll keep this polite, you will receive very strong objections from Ealing residents. All of this could have been foreseen if there had been consultation ahead of making local residents' lives a misery. But we know what the vast majority of residents think, the residents who are supposed to benefit from these schemes. 3,000 marched up Northfield Avenue, 3,000 local residents, almost 10,000 have now signed the Stop the LTN petition. 10,000 people. As Conservatives, we published a questionnaire just last week. Thank you. As Conservatives, we published a questionnaire just last week, as Councillor Stafford said, and so far over 1,000 have responded. 94% think the council should have consulted first. 94% think it has made congestion and pollution worse, and 93% want to see the LTNs removed. Now you might say, okay, it's self-selecting, it's a Conservative questionnaire, but it is still 930 people who have responded to our questionnaire saying they want the LTNs removed. So, Mr. Mayor, we call for these LTNs to be suspended until there is a proper consultation with residents.
Okay, Councillor Milligan, Councillor Bell to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And before I start, can I just say that in the light of the monitoring officer's comments about the legal challenge and needing to be careful about what we say, this is a statement on behalf of the Cabinet that I will give jointly with Councillor Sabiers. We all want the best possible neighbourhoods to live in. During the lockdown, fewer used their cars and it had a positive impact on their neighbourhoods and London's air quality. This gave us an insight of what life could be like with fewer cars on the roads, walking, cycling, exercise, play and meeting, albeit socially distant, on a Thursday evening to clap for the NHS and our key workers. As lockdown was beginning to ease, the government and TfL had serious concerns that car use in the capital would double with less people allowed on public transport and 90% fewer users of the tube. More would take to their cars as an alternative. The concern was that our streets would be gridlocked and traffic diverted through our residential streets from busy main roads. Air pollution levels would soar, with 2/3 of air pollution coming from vehicles, and we would see an increase in the 387 early deaths already seen in Ealing from air pollution. The government believed this was going to be a serious issue and asked local authorities to put schemes in place to encourage more active travel and less car use. Councils could access government funding, but only on the proviso they acted swiftly and introduced the schemes to prevent this from happening. We have a proud record of being London's greenest borough and wanted to do everything we could to keep people safe, reduce levels of air pollution and with clearer roads, give people the confidence to try different types of travel, particularly for short journeys. We all know there is a climate emergency and urgent action is needed. But this is not a challenge the council can face alone. We have committed to become carbon neutral by 2030 and it requires everyone in the community to take action. Our response to the government's asks of us was to initially support COVID restrictions by implementing a wide-ranging programme of active travel schemes, putting in place temporary measures to widen pavements, create cycle lanes and consider safer streets for our children's return to school. We agreed to trial low traffic neighbourhoods as part of this approach, although the majority of funding is going on non-low traffic neighbourhood schemes. We are trialling low traffic neighbourhoods in areas which are expected to see more traffic in the future due to COVID-19 restrictions on the use of public transport and the move to more people taking their cars as an alternative. The temporary schemes are designed to ensure that residents on those roads can continue to access their homes. They are designed to reduce the number of car journeys to create safer neighbourhoods so that more people will feel safe to walk and cycle rather than use the car for short trips and to discourage drivers from seeing Ealing as a way of shaving a few minutes off their journey through or into Ealing. There are already a significant of traffic schemes in place throughout the borough to stop exactly this sort of through traffic that have had a positive impact for residents in those roads and beyond. At the same time, COVID-19 has also shown us that people with underlying health conditions such as obesity are more vulnerable to the virus. 1 in 5 adults in Ealing are physically inactive and over 30% of car journeys are less than 2 miles. Being more active as part of our daily lives is the easiest way to get fitter and healthier. Low traffic neighbourhoods and the other schemes we've introduced will help with this. The council has received legal claims in relation to the low traffic neighbourhoods As they are subject to current litigation, we will not comment further on individual schemes, but will say that we will robustly defend the legal claims we have received. We know that people have strong views, both for and against. What we promise is that their views are being heard. In Ealing, we have always been a community that lives well side by side, even if views differ from each other, and ask that people remember that and are respectful in how they make their views known. There are legitimate routes to share your views, oppose or support the schemes, but I ask that people show others respect in person and on online forums and not condone vandalism. For many of us, streets in our residential areas have become conduits for through traffic rather than places where residents can walk, cycle, meet or play. With more drivers relying on sat-navs to identify the quickest through routes, through traffic is likely to increase. We want children to be able to play and travel more independently and older people to be active and mobile. We think low traffic neighbourhoods could be the key to a much healthier, greener and pleasant local neighbourhood. I'd now like to hand over to Councillor Sabius.
Yeah, because of legal action, I'm also reading the second part of the prepared statement on behalf of the Cabinet. I would like to just go offline slightly and thank Lorna for her contribution. It's always good to see members of the public bring forward their views. These schemes have aroused passionate views, both for and against. In normal circumstances, I would say we wouldn't have introduced them without prior consultation, which would have provided an opportunity for residents to fully understand the impact of them. But because it was part of our response to the pandemic, we had to accelerate their delivery. The Street Praise programme has been developed based upon government guidance. That really has been the case, Councillor Stafford, that such changes are to be delivered as swiftly as possible and clarified further to be within weeks. The approach that we have adopted in Ealing to meet this has been via the use of the ETO's experimental traffic orders. These ETOs, provided in the Road Traffic Regulation Act of 1984, enable schemes to be trialled at the same time that the consultation and engagement is undertaken. This feedback is typically gathered within 6 months of the trial to allow the network time to respond to the change made, along with a range of other data such as the traffic flows. It's a different approach to the one the council has typically adopted when implementing traffic schemes, but this approach has been adopted in response to the new government guidance to implement this as swiftly as possible. We also have worked closely with the emergency services in our borough, and safety will always be our top priority. We've had ongoing engagement with all the emergency services, and none have raised any formal objections to this scheme. We have publicly apologised that the London Ambulance Service were not consulted at the same time as the Met Police and Fire Brigade, and we deeply regret this mistake. The ambulance service has, however, provided detailed feedback, and this has resulted in changes from bollards to cameras at some locations. And the ambulance service has actually identified that our way of engaging could serve as a model for other boroughs to follow. You know, it's important that we do that. The bollards we use are based on fire brigade recommendations, all have standard keys which are readily available, and we've offered extra keys to the services as well. These are the same keys which access other restrictions already in place in the borough that people should be able to get through. Only after the impacts have been fully assessed will decisions be taken on whether or not to make each scheme, experimental order in this case, permanent or modify or suspend it. I'd also like to say we are introducing Commonplace, which is an online engagement platform that allows for people to post their views on the schemes, and that will hopefully go live this week. Commonplace will make it easier for residents to make comments and provide rolling feedback on individual schemes. It will also allow residents to highlight specific issues that we can pick up and address as necessary. Later on in the trial that we're doing, we will be asking people to complete a survey where again they'll be able to share their views. We're also planning on introducing focus groups with businesses and residents carried out independently, and these will be taken into account when we reach a final decision on each of the orders. Individual schemes will also have what we term an interim assessment to look at feedback from residents and businesses, and that's including those received via email and through Commonplace, traffic data, comments from colleagues in the emergency services, and also feedback from ward councillors. The purpose of the interim assessment process is to check there are no significant issues that require immediate action or modification. These are due to take place with a summary report published by December. At the end of each 6-month period for each low traffic neighbourhood, a final formal review will take place, and officers will look at all the available data gathered over this longer period. That will cover air quality, traffic figures, the impact on local businesses, feedback from residents, and all views expressed in this initial assessment will be updated before delivering a report to Cabinet for consideration on whether each scheme should be made permanent, modified or suspended. As each individual scheme started on different dates, they may not all be considered together, but they will go to the first appropriate Cabinet meeting in public. Due to the postponed mayoral and GLA elections, some restrictions will affect when Cabinet can consider these reports, but it may be that some will come after the elections. I just really would like to reiterate and fully reassure residents and councillors here that we do want their views and we will listen. Those views will be taken into account at the point when the interim assessments take place and also when the final decisions are made. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Call Councillor Sumner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Lorna O'Driscoll. Mr. Mayor, councillors, I rise to object to the Ealing low traffic neighbourhood schemes. I strongly believe that these schemes don't reflect the needs of local residents. Without consultation, the closure of local distributed roads has diverted traffic onto narrow, quieter residential roads. As well as the main roads, this has added traffic onto roads, reduced air quality and added dangers to residents and their children going about their lives. Mr. Mayor, these proposals have not been officially published for consultation and therefore residents have not been afforded the chance to consider the matter. We deem this to be undemocratic, non-transparent and a failure of the council to serve the community responsibly. I believe this lack of transparency has created much fear and anger in people. I'm also concerned that congestion and road blockages may cause problems for emergency service access. We have many elderly, vulnerable residents in poor health with an increased dependency on emergency medical services during this COVID-19 pandemic, when timely interventions can be critical. Mr. Mayor, I believe this plan to be completely ageist and discriminatory against at least 20% of Ealing's residents. Along with my concerns for the emergency services, fire and ambulance, I worry the impact these schemes will have on our public services and the access they require weekly to conduct their duties. The current schemes make no provision for an alternative route for traffic to enter or leave the area. Thus, at least every week, when said public service vehicles perform their duties, all impacted residences will be placed in gridlock with little or no vehicle access. Mr. Mayor, low traffic neighbourhoods schemes have caused serious disruption to local lives and businesses. The traffic is being funneled onto the outer roads, causing unnecessary chaos and increasing pollution. Mr. Mayor, the council states that the LTNs are designed to reduce route running traffic and improve air quality. However, no baseline data is available, but there is a significant increase in traffic due to more traffic being forced to use a smaller number of roads. There is a significant increase in idling traffic and longer distances to travel, and an increase in air pollution. I urge the council to remove the LTN bollards and planters, obtain baseline data, consult with residents. With more than 10,000 signatures on a petition, 3,000 residents attending a protest march, and many thousands of email complaints. It is clear that the majority believe that this is the right course of action. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Councillor Malcolm, move amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Lorna, initially for your petition and the comments that you've made on the LTNs. They summarise a lot of the problems that many people have seen across the borough. The Lib Dems support the aim of getting more people to walk and cycle. I walk and cycle and I don't own a car. So you may be asking, why am I against that when my group on many occasions, whether it's home zones or the mini Holland bids, have supported cycling initiatives? Well, sadly, the LTNs are different because there was no consultation, and for myself that is an absolutely crucial point. There are many viewpoints that residents would have had, problems they could have seen because they know the roads better than most council officers or even councillors in their areas. And so therefore those people who need cars, those people who are disabled, really do need to have had their views fed in at the beginning and not 2 months into the equation, as Councillor Sabiers was referring to recently. I was also totally amazed when the London ambulance services were not consulted. It was far too late when that was done. That was a massive failing in the process. But looking at the amendments, I'm referring to a scheme that essentially is almost akin to an LTN in Fisher's Lane in Southfield. We border Hounslow. There is very little dialogue, it seems, between Hounslow Council and Ealing Council, where one borough, Ealing, closed off one road, Hounslow closed off another, and that meant some of the same problems we've seen across West Ealing and elsewhere, we've seen in our own area. So there's the issue of the consultation. Well, this prompted myself and my 2 ward councillors in Southfield to conduct a survey ourselves, and we've had just over 1,200 responses to date. 90% wished they had a consultation beforehand. 3/4 or more were against the scheme. There were many people who had suggestions about how to avoid some of the problems we've seen, such as there have been a number of accidents, one involving a cyclist, huge congestion on the roads, problems with air quality, and they've been ignored at that point. The officers of both councils have not wanted to listen. When you read some of the comments, the verbatim comments from those who are disabled, it's quite, it tugs at the heartstrings when one gentleman says a 5-minute journey now would take him over an hour, and he had to return home on 2 occasions, given he was in such pain because of his pain levels, and that isn't how we should be treating our residents at Ealing or Hounslow. It's not clear how the council is meant to assess these schemes in reality. There is no data beforehand, and measuring them afterwards I don't think is really an adequate solution. The Lib Dem group want to see that the council listens to people and works with people before a scheme is set up, rather than using a metaphorical bulldozer. The Lib Dems have shown that consultation could have been done quickly. Within 3 or 4 days, we got that data of what people thought and alternatives that were possible. The council should have done that if they'd really wanted to consult with people. We do hope that the Labour group will listen to people rather than treating them with contempt. We should suspend all the LTNs and re-engage with residents. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Ball.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You may recall that I moved the climate emergency motion back when we had physical meetings in the town hall. So when I first heard of urgent measures being taken to encourage active travel, cycling and walking, I was pleasantly surprised. However, it very swiftly went wrong when the schemes were designed and pushed through with absolutely no resident consultation. Councillors were sent rough plans for the schemes proposed for our wards. I and many other councillors realised the designs would cause problems and made suggestions to change them based on our local knowledge. These suggestions were almost all ignored. Shockingly, councillors were told not to reveal plans of the schemes to residents. Councillor Bell promised me that there would be 1 week's public consultation prior to implementation. However, even this minimal amount of consultation turned out not to be real. It was purely a statutory notice period, not a mechanism for resident knowledge to be taken into account. Comments of residents were almost all ignored, with the exception of 1 or 2 streets and a couple of the LTNs. Then the schemes were implemented. Car journeys of a few minutes now take up to an hour, which is a huge problem in particular for our disabled residents who simply cannot walk or get on their bikes. The last straw was when it transpired that the administration hadn't consulted the London Ambulance Service. As we're heading into a second wave of the pandemic, this is unforgivable. Local traffic neighbourhoods are now a fatally damaged brand. The administration needs to pull out the LTNs and start from scratch without consent. Our amendment points out that the blame for failure to consult is a shared one. The government and the Mayor of London pushed these schemes through with very little time to consult, but there was time to do some consultation, and Ealing chose to do the opposite, to hide the schemes from residents and ignore their comments. Mr. Mayor, this administration needs to listen to residents, not to ignore them. Vote for the motion and our amendment to scrap the LTNs.
Thank you. Dr. Dabrowska.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to Mrs. O'Driscoll for the petition and your efforts in gathering the signatures. Firstly, I would like to say that I am glad this is a virtual meeting, otherwise I would have still been stuck in traffic or exploring Greenfield or Hanwell on my commute back from work from the home counties. The initiative of reducing pollution is one that most people wish to see and implement. No one likes breathing in vehicle fumes. It really goes without saying. However, as my colleagues have mentioned earlier, the way the Labour administration have introduced the LTNs by stealth is rather cowardly. Were they scared of a backlash that we are currently experiencing, or do they see pound signs? While some restrictions had previously already existed here and there, whilst discouraging rat running across certain residential roads, those mostly have been put in as a direct request from the residents who have experienced it firsthand. However, the cumulative effect of the newly erected planters with the haphazard and flawed design of the LTN zones, not mentioning the disastrous implementation, has resulted in a high particulate count gridlock along the main thoroughfares. And in the W5 and W13 postcodes, there are many schools along these roads which have been negatively impacted. I live in an LTN, and by TfL's analysis and definition, I reside on a moderate to low traffic residential street. Yet Ealing Council decided to make the area the most congested overnight. So now a previous 27-minute commute now takes 41 minutes. One weekend earlier this month, I received leaflets from both the anti-LTN lobby and the pro-LTN lobby. I managed to speak to the pro-lobby group, who I happen to know from working together on a previously successful opposition motion about improving safety along Uxbridge Road, if everyone remembers, and everyone voted unanimously. It improves safety on Uxbridge Road and still hopefully will improve safety for those moving forward. This may come as a surprise to the Labour administration, but the pro-lobby individuals agreed with me that the design of the LTNs was flawed. Like everything in life, the true test comes not from the design of things, but rather the people who have to use and live with them, whose views really matter. LTNs, well done properly, should discourage through traffic, yet still be easily accessible for residents to get home. Instead, the council has made residential roads into large, relatively empty, dark cycle paths, whilst those needing to get to health appointments, to work, to wherever, are stuck in traffic gridlock, regardless if they're in their own vehicle or on a TfL bus. Like with every one of these LTNs, there are a few winners and many losers. Have a look at the Olive Road scheme in my ward. Some residents have benefited from the low pollution, yet many more along South Ealing Road and especially along the single lane Pope's Lane, where tailbacks are now all the way to Gunsey Park. For years, the council resisted one-way solutions in that specific area because I've been working with the council for so many years trying to find a solution there. Yet overnight, they implemented two one-way systems, which created a whole gridlock in the streets around. Like Pope's Lane, South Ealing Road, Norfield Avenue and Uxbridge Road are now a car park. Public transport and emergency services struggling to get through. With enforcement cameras popping up all over the place because the bollards have failed, can the council just simply admit they're now seeing these planters as cash cows? I suppose this is what you call a money tree. Please remove the LTNs or seriously redesign them with the consultation of residents in mind. Thank you.
Councillor Rice.
Thank you. I used to live in Northfields back in 2005 at the delightfully sounding address of 11 Little Ealing Lane. And if there is one thing I remember most about Northfields, it is the cargo bikes that parents were using to cycle their toddlers and children around in. What a genius way to safely transport the family around locally. And now we find ourselves relying on even more residents to cycle to cut back on traffic on our roads, whether it be in response to the pandemic and any reluctance to use public transport, or whether it be for the long term to deal with the climate emergency and the poor air quality which can potentially harm us all. LTNs are not new, and they've existed around the country for decades and have proven to be extremely successful. A Redfield and Wilton survey found that 33% of Londoners support the introduction of LTNs, with a further 19% strongly supporting them, and just a further 19% in total either opposing them or strongly opposing them. And recent analysis by the University of Westminster's Professor Rachel Aldred found that not only do people walk and cycle more in low traffic neighbourhoods, but over time car ownership drops too. Colleagues in my workplace are always eager to give me a piece of their mind when it comes to politics. As many as 4 colleagues lived in Walthamstow when the Mini Holland scheme was first touted, and my colleagues were not happy. Although once the benefits came to fruition, I heard nothing further. In fact, another colleague arrived into work last week and wanted to tell me just how pleased she was with the LTNs in her area of the capital. My point is that we give LTNs a chance. Dr. Steve Mellier from UWE tells us that we have to win the battle for hearts and minds, and past experience inclines me to agree. There was opposition to the introduction of wheelie bins, the ban on smoking in our pubs, and the mandatory wearing of seatbelts in the front. I'm old enough to remember reporters on TVAM putting microphones through the open windows of cars and hearing from very unhappy drivers when it came to the seatbelts. In all these examples, there was later acceptance. I believe that we can reduce the volume of traffic on our roads overall. New car-free developments are regularly gaining planning permission, and future residents will indeed travel without a car. Travel plans at our schools discourage the use of cars for the school run, and this will protect the lungs of our children too. We need to give LTNs a chance to reduce overall traffic volume too, and going back to Walthamstow, Waltham Forest, low traffic neighbourhoods led to a 56% reduction in traffic within the neighbourhood and a 16% reduction in the wider area, but no increase on the surrounding main roads. I did attend the online London Ambulance Service Trust annual public meeting only a few weeks ago, and I was pleased to hear that no LTNs have caused significant issues with delays or regards patient safety. The consultation with residents in Ealing on LTNs is ongoing, and we are giving low traffic neighbourhoods a chance. Thank you.
Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The chaos of LTNs. A disabled lady in her late 80s, the commuter who is required to travel to work by car, the mother with a small child rushing to get errands completed and return home to a daughter with disability, the elderly gentleman trying to get to the doctor, the police car or ambulance services attempting to get to the site of an emergency, the delivery van delivering to a shielded person, the rubbish truck who cannot collect the bins amongst the gridlocked roads, the local resident who has to park their car in another road. All of these are residents or workers of Ealing impacted severely and under distress by the imposition of the bollards blocking the roads. But Ealing Council are happy for them to suffer by imposing LTNs in their streets, which not only make their lives so difficult, but also for those who care and have to transport them. Zero consultation and no type of impact assessment on those with special needs. What a joke for a party which claims to put the vulnerable first. Over 10,000 people have signed objections to date, and the number of complaints soared. The LTNs have caused misery, distress, upset, and so much inconvenience. This is a terrible scheme. There has been major traffic congestion across the borough, Mattock Lane, Horn Lane, Northfields, gridlocks and backlog to Uxbridge Road, amongst others. It does not make cycling any easier either. There are no facts to support that LTNs reduce pollution. It would appear it increases it. Take school children and nurseries. The extra air and noise pollution created at the schools on the perimeter is appalling, and residents ask, how can this be sanctioned? Local businesses have seen a 40% drop in trade when they need support crucially. Limited access for the elderly and sick is punitive and discriminatory. A concerned key worker raised this with me, saying, for secondary care hospital services, it is delaying essential outpatient appointments for vulnerable patients who require the use of hospital transport due to the additional traffic on the main roads. These patients are having to wait much longer, making them late for their appointments and clinics running over. Most of these patients are not mobile, so are made ready in the morning by their care staff. So while they wait for transport, they cannot go to the toilet, get or eat food, and are stressed. For community care, the additional traffic takes me so much longer to get to patients. No time for lunch on a community day, as it keeps changing. Sat-navs don't update, so I keep getting stuck on the wrong side of the bollards, making me late for patients, unquote. All this at a time when there is a pandemic. Families are trying to help each other, carers are trying to care, and people trying to work from home. There is a saying, a leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. Clearly, in this case, not showing the right way. I urge you to do the right thing by our residents and end this 8-week experiment immediately. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Driscoll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I'll start off with a question that many of us asked ourselves during the height of lockdown, which was how can we hold on to some of the benefits that we saw in lockdown about quieter and safer streets? And it's a question that many of us asked ourselves, and I was asked by a resident. But I was also told by the same resident that it was the first time that he felt safe enough to teach his children to ride a bike. It was the first time they decided as a family they would leave the car behind and use bikes to go around the local neighbourhood, because the streets felt safe and because the streets felt quieter. So while COVID and lockdown had many severe consequences, there could be some options that we can retain some beneficial outcome. This motion is just a one size, one cap fits all response to low traffic neighbourhoods. It doesn't take account of scale, design, complexity, or even simplicity of some low traffic neighbourhoods. The one size fits all assessment in this motion is a poor response. Evaluating each scheme on its context of its merits would be a better approach, but this would not be easy and would not be less pleasing to an audience. This would involve explaining that the low traffic neighbourhoods are trials and will be reviewed. As I explained to many councillors at a whole councillor briefing with officers, that all of the Northfields Ward LTNs were amended following comments, and many other ones as well. And we should pass that message on to our residents who make inquiries, or sometimes it's convenient to miss that message because it fills with a preset narrative that some councillors have. The motion fails to recognise that the main aim of low traffic neighbourhoods is to do what the government would like to see us do as well, to improve walking and cycling. We want and need to see a step change in cycling and walking in the coming years. This is a huge challenge, but the ambition is clear. We have a unique opportunity to transform the role of cycling and walking and how these can play a role in transport. A direct quote from the Department of Transport. These are fine words, but they need some action. 30% of our car journeys are under 2 kilometres. 40% are under around about less than 3.5 kilometres. Some will need to use a car to use for this because of health, age, other reasons. That's fine, but many could have a different choice. And we need to make sure that we're promoting that choice, because for every local car journey that is done by active travel, we will save a space on the road for those who need to use a car. That will remove congestion, it will give better flow to traffic, but this isn't going to happen overnight. It needs a shift in attitudes and a shift in behaviour. But already I meet residents who are thinking about actively and reflecting how they use their travel decisions locally. We have 50,000, almost 50,000 residents furloughed in Ealing, about 40,000 furloughed in Hounslow, and multiple tens of thousands furloughed in neighbouring boroughs. We have many working from home, and yet there's still a lot of pressure on our roads. Traffic is measured by the Department of Transport at pre-COVID levels or thereabouts, and sometimes above, and yet we've got pressures. It's an urgent time to take action. Other councillors know that we had to make a decision swiftly, and we've got a pressing need. We've got a need for the environment, we've got a need to promote active travel, and low traffic neighbourhoods with a review play a role in that. And that's what we should be aiming for, with a proper review that gives the feedback and treats each LTN as a proper assessment and its own merits. I would ask councillors to reject the motion and the amendment. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Young. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to talk for a minute about evaporation of traffic, which the planners think is a good thing, but I want to explain is a very bad thing to happen. You don't get a modal shift with these things. Journeys just do not happen, but there is a real cost to that. There's an economic cost for businesses. If it costs them so much to visit a client or a customer, if it takes them twice as long, it's going to cost them twice as much. And they can't bear the burden of these costs, not in these difficult economic times. But of course, Labour doesn't care about it. And it's more difficult for customers to get to shops. I was speaking to somebody today who said she normally visited a small local shop, but because of the LTNs, it took her so long to get there, it wasn't worth it. She'll go to the big Tesco supermarket down the road instead. Fewer customers for the businesses means even more economic chaos, but Labour doesn't care. But it's not just cash costs. If you're a community nurse and you're visiting patients in the community, it takes you twice as long to get there. You can't see as many patients in the day. The NHS won't work as well, but Labour doesn't care. There's a social cost. Talking to somebody else, she visits a local resident who's disabled, who can't get out of the house, and she makes frequent short visits. But now, instead of taking a quarter of an hour to get there, it takes half an hour to get there. And she's going to have to make fewer visits, longer visits, hopefully, to make up for the time that she's missing. But that means that the person who's housebound won't get as many visits and will be left at home on their own for longer. But Labour doesn't care. We've already talked for a minute about people who are housebound, but people who aren't housebound but have a blue badge can't get out. The bollards don't respect blue badges. You can't just drive through if you've got a blue badge. You're going to be stuck in your homes because you can't get anywhere. It takes so long to get there. But Labour, of course, doesn't care. We've heard about the promise for consultation. Well, it didn't work with the emergency services, did it? And it certainly didn't work with Longfield Avenue, where a similar experimental traffic order came in. And after several months, people gave up writing in, and then the council then said, oh, we're going to make it permanent, because they didn't listen to what people were saying, because Labour doesn't care. I just wonder about the planning of these LTNs as well. I was in Crane Avenue today in Acton. It's a very small road, but some years ago, they had a bollard there to prevent running traffic. It was removed at the request of residents because of the disruption it caused to the locality. The benefit from closing it wasn't worth the disruption. Guess what? As part of an LTN, the bollard's gone back in again at the other end of the road this time. I sometimes wonder whether the Labour Party has got something against Northfield's area, because with LTNs to the left and to the right of them, they're stuck in a corridor between the Uxbridge Road and the M4, and they can't get out. And if you're a shopkeeper there, you are threatened first of all by the loss of your stop and shop. Now about half of your business can't get to you because of the LTNs. But of course, Labour doesn't care. We've talked also about the amount of pollution and congestion on the routes that are still open. There's been a massive increase. People are noticing it and they're resenting it. But Labour doesn't care. Mr. Mayor, I support this motion and the views of the people of Ealing. I urge you to vote in favour of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor O'Connell.
Hello, thank you, Mr. Mayor. One thing that it's important to say about low traffic neighbourhoods is that these are about encouraging behaviour change, encouraging the reduction in car usage. And this, of course, is very controversial and it provokes a backlash. The thing is, though, that if we really want to reduce congestion in London, if we want to reduce pollution, if we want to significantly reduce carbon emissions and stop the effects of global warming, then there's no serious way we can do that without reducing traffic usage to some extent. And how are we going to do that? Well, lots of people, almost everyone, pays lip service to the objectives of reducing these things. But when it comes to behaviour change, it's much more difficult. It's generally other people's behaviour that they think needs to change, but not their own. But if everybody leaves it up to other people to reduce their car use, then nothing's going to happen. None of these great objectives are going to be achieved. LTNs are just one small attempt that is part of the wider solution to try and nudge people into reducing their car usage. Now, is this sort of behaviour change possible? Yes, it is. There's plenty of evidence of it. A lot of people, it is still their default mode of travel, even for very short journeys, to use the car. One person complained to me that they had a car journey that took 90 seconds that now takes much longer. They thought this was a reasonable complaint. but you can't drive very far in Ealing in a car in 90 seconds. The distance is one that could perfectly easily be covered by most people by walking, and it could much more quickly and easily be covered by bike. Also, people continually tell me that walking, cycling is fine in the summer when the weather's nice, but they can't or won't do it, you know, when it's cold or when it's wet. Well, lots of people, you know, do walk or cycle when it's cold or when it's wet. Yet too many people still reach for the car keys more easily than they reach for a coat or an umbrella, which would do the job just as well and would still allow active travel. Then there's the business of shopping. People say, well, this is something that they can't possibly do without the car because they've become accustomed to the ritual weekly trip to the supermarket to load up the boot with all their shopping. But you don't have to shop like that. It's quite possible to make more frequent and less extensive shops and to get all that you need that way. In fact, you could also make more use of very local shops that you could discover things like greengrocers, butchers, bakers, all of these sorts of shops that are often run by small independent businesses. And if more people shop more often, more locally, then it would be a great benefit to local businesses. Okay, just finally, this resolution, it pays lip service to the objectives of reducing pollution, but then it says just scrap LTNs and forget about it, push the whole issue into the long grass. The thing is, the LTNs, they can be changed. Bits of them that work can be kept. Bits that don't work can be scrapped. If necessary, whole LTNs can be scrapped at the end of the trial. But simply scrapping all of them now, prematurely, without giving them a chance to work, is completely the wrong approach. It's not part of the answer. It's just an attempt to jump on a populist bandwagon to try and get easy votes. And I ask people to vote against this resolution. Thank you.
Markham, some of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I'm happy to sum up now. Thank you. Thank you for all those who've taken part in this. I guess I'm left with one question where I can see that Councillor Sabias has to some degree backtracked on what the position appeared to be a few weeks or even 2 months ago when they were first being introduced, or when officers were speaking with myself and ward councillors in relation to the Fisher's Lane scheme. And he talks now about the regular sort of consultations that will take place. So can I ask Councillor Sabias, given it's his portfolio, will you cancel or amend any scheme if I show you the data that I've got at the moment, and no doubt other LTN areas, there'll be other data that comes in. If you agree that a scheme is not workable, will you cancel it, or will you be waiting the 4 or 5 months until that 6-month period lapses? That's my first point in relation to that. I think there have been a great deal of comments pro and for, but I think the main issue that many people have talked about is the lack of consultation. But my own group have shown that if you want to consult people, you can do that within only a few days. If you remember, when a council consults on things such as CPZs, we often wait a number of weeks for those, but you don't actually need to wait a number of weeks. Sometimes if there is an emergency, as you put it, it is better to get some data within 3 days and make some judgment on it. You get feedback from residents who know those streets better than most people. If you're on the border of Hounslow and Ealing, it is absolutely crucial you know what the opposition of the council is doing, but that was missed and that was an opportunity. I've got a huge amount of data about what people think. I hope, Councillor Sabers, you will listen to that in the coming days and weeks. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Stafford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Before I address what's been spoken about so far in this debate, I would just like to say that I'm not going to accept the Lib Dem amendment. I will accept the insertion of the Fisher's Lane point into the bullet point, because I accept Fisher's Lane isn't an official LTN and we need to make it clear that the problems are around Fisher's Lane as well. But I don't accept that the government, or indeed the Mayor of London, who I'm not a fan of, as you can imagine, hold the lion's share of blame for this. And as Councillor Bell and Sabias have already said, this was their decision to implement LTNs and their decision on how it should be consulted upon. And what struck me from the speeches of the Labour members tonight was the complete lack of recognition of any of the myriad of problems and concerns that have been raised by us as councillors, and more importantly, by residents of this borough. We even heard, and it's now shocking, Councillor Sabir saying that actually we might not get a result on these till May, 9 months after some of these have been put in. I was shocked, but not particularly surprised, I have to say, that local ward councillors, Councillor Driscoll, Councillor Block, Councillor Conlon, were very happy to talk about national statistics and the UN and Greta Thunberg, but didn't once mention any of the concerns that I know their residents have raised with them. They've said, you might not like them now, but you're going to like them in 9 months' time, so don't worry. To the nurse who can't visit patients, don't worry, you're going to like it in 9 months' time. To the doctor who can no longer do as many house calls, don't worry, you're going to like it in 9 months' time. To the disabled person who can't get to the doctor or get around as much now because of the gridlock, don't worry, you're going to like it in 9 months' time. To the small businessman who's lost 40% of his business, don't worry, you're going to like it in 9 months' time. And to the schoolgirl who I spoke today, who can no longer go to her after-school clubs and play hockey, don't worry, you're going to love it in 9 months' time. Labour does not listen to their residents. We need to scrap these LTNs, consult properly on things that will make a difference. And tonight, we must vote for this motion. Thank you.
I will now ask the whips from the parties to indicate their parties' votes on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Labour group will be voting against the amendment.
Mr. Mayor, the Conservative group votes against the amendment. We do not support the amendment.
The Liberal Democrat group, obviously, we support our amendment. Just like to say that as Councillor Stafford has accepted the Fisher's Lane part, then so see, we're now voting on the full amendment, but the Conservative motion will now include the other parts of our amendment. Is that correct, Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Mayor, to clarify, I accept the insertion of the words Fisher's Lane into the relevant bullet point, but the rest of the motion we don't accept.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, can I, before we move on to considering further the amendments in the way that councillors have indicated, could you just give members of all parties a chance to indicate if they dissent in any way from the views of their whips, just for a couple of seconds, Mr. Mayor?
Can you please go ahead, the three parties?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Perhaps Helen could just, or Sam could just advise exactly what we're now voting on in terms of the amendments. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I'm happy to advise on that, Paul and Mr. Mayor. So just for clarity, the amendment that was put forward by the Liberal Democrat group today in writing has been lost. However, Councillor Stafford indicated he was willing to add in Fisher's Lane into the I think it's one of the final bullet points, so a specific reference to Fisher's Lane when it mentions the LTNs. So it will be that Conservative motion as amended in that way, because Councillor Stafford agreed to that, providing Councillor Milliken, who was the seconder, I believe, of the motion, also agrees to that.
Yes, I'm happy to support that, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
Sam, can I just check, do we not have to ask Councillor Gordon whether he supports that amendment from the Labour side?
No, because this is the mover of the original motion who has accepted the amendment without it being. So essentially, the motion that was originally put forward has been amended by the mover of that motion. So that now becomes the motion that's being voted on.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, we can now move to the substantive vote on the motion as amended. If you're happy that I do that, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Mayor, we request a recorded vote.
Yeah.
And supporting that, Councillor Young, Councillor Milliken. So three of us supporting that recorded vote.
Thank you very much, councillors. So what I will do is I'll read out each member's name in relation to the vote as amended. When you hear your name, please confirm whether you're voting for, against, or abstaining from this motion. If members are not able to vote verbally for any reason, technically, etc., they should indicate their vote via the chat box, and their vote will be read out at the end of the recorded vote. So I'll now proceed to read out the names of all councillors, and if you could indicate how you're proposing to vote. I'll begin with Councillor Gordon.
Against.
Shaw.
Against.
Rooney.
Against.
Raza. Nothing heard from Councillor Raza. Costigan.
Against.
Jammu.
Against.
Mahmood.
Against.
Kaur Deer.
Against.
Nagpal.
Against.
Blacker.
Against.
Manro.
Against.
Rye.
Against.
Sabias.
Against.
Camadou Rothwell.
Against.
Kelly. Nothing heard. Block.
Against.
Bell.
Against.
Johnson.
Against.
Mahfouz.
Against.
J. Anand.
Against.
R. Wall.
Against.
L. Wall.
Against.
Martin.
Against.
Woodruff.
Against.
Taylor.
Against.
R. Mann.
Against.
G. Mann.
Against.
P. Anand. Nothing heard from Councillor P. Anand. Deer.
Against.
D. Crawford.
Against.
K. Crawford.
Against.
Byrne.
Against.
Rice.
Against.
Chauhan. Sahota.
Against.
Mohan.
Against.
Midder. Nothing heard from Councillor Midder. Cox. Thanks, Councillor Cox. Donnelly.
Against.
Burke.
Against.
Murta.
Against.
Dinser.
Against.
Padder.
Against.
Anjum.
Against.
Summers.
Against.
Aslam.
Against.
S. Ahmed.
Against.
Sharma. Nothing heard from Councillor Sharma. Conlon.
Sorry, against.
Lusardi.
Against.
Dadwal.
Against.
Darmy. Nothing heard from Councillor Darmy. Driscoll.
Against.
Dubrovska.
Against.
Thank you, Councillor Darmy. Dubrovska.
For.
Sumner.
4.
Kumar,
4.
Milliken,
4.
G. Stafford,
4.
Young,
4.
Ball,
4.
Steed. Nothing heard from Councillor Steed. Malcolm,
4.
Busuttil,
4.
Deputy Mayor,
Against.
Mr. Mayor.
Abstain.
And we have 3 votes in the chat box. Councillor Raza voted against, Councillor Kelly voted against the motion, and Councillor Steed voted for the motion. So, Mr. Mayor,
Paul, Councillor Anand here. Against.
Against. Thank you very much for clarifying, Councillor Anand. If there are any other councillors, just speak now. If not, Mr. Mayor, then the motion therefore falls, and you can move on to item 6 on the agenda.
Okay, thank you very much.